It's new technology, so we're quite excited by this, that the approach works and it works so well. What normally happens when people get mixed up about genetics, they sort of imagine Jurassic Park type scenarios. It's nothing like that. This actually uses a bit of genetic machinery that breaks down very quickly. It's very difficult to find the RNA in it. Remember, this is not DNA, this is RNA. This is more like reading a script or speaking a script rather than writing it down. So it disappears very quickly, and the purpose behind that is it's injected into your muscles and it produces some of the protein that the virus produces, and because of that you get a significant dose of the protein that your body hasn't met before. It mounts an immune response. You give it a second booster dose after at least 21 days, and then you mount what appears to be a 94% efficacious response to it.
Now, the rollout is envisaged for over 80s and those in elderly residential services first, as well as healthcare workers. When do you envisage being able to do this?
There's quite a lot of logistics involved. One of the things about this vaccine that we're going to get is it needs to be stored at -70, which is quite cold, and that's unusual. Normally we deal with things at 4 degrees or around that temperature, so it will be shipped to us in dry ice. When it comes here, we have to store it at that temperature. We can store it for 6 months. So we're in the process of acquiring two freezers. They're actually about to hit the road in Belgium tomorrow, I believe, and they will be driven over here. We're going to put them in the GHA, make sure that they don't switch off. There's power supplies and things like that. We put them in there and we'll get them in packs, and then I think and hope that we'll then begin the rollout of the program, which means that we have to thaw it, because obviously nobody wants to be injected with something that cold, and we then have to reconstitute it with a bit of saline, and you'll get a small dose in your arm. I suspect that we've got quite a lot of technical stuff to go through in terms of making sure that we don't lose the efficacy of the vaccine during that whole process. But certainly for the ordinary members of the public, you'll have a vaccine site you'll go to and you'll be jabbed, and then we'll keep a record of what batch number you are on, and then call you back in three or 4 weeks' time.
So with all those logistics in mind, what is the time frame you estimate before you can actually start administering this vaccine to the first demographic, which is the over 80s, etc.?
So I was originally told that we were likely to get it in the first week of December. Now clearly what's happened is that the regulatory authority has only just approved it, as we know today, and they have been manufacturing it in Belgium, I believe. So the doses are available. They have to be shipped and tested in the UK, and then after that they then have to be shipped to us, flown to us actually. So I don't know exactly when they will arrive. I hope it will be relatively soon, but as soon as it does arrive, we can kickstart our program. It will take us at least a couple of weeks really once we've got delivery of it. So I'm expecting about a week for the freezers to come, and then 2 weeks on top of that.
So when and how do you plan to vaccinate the rest of the population?
So we'll do it in a phased way. I think one of the things we'll need to do, particularly given the timescales that we're operating on, is how can we designate people who might be doing other less urgent things to be able to go out en masse. The good thing for us as a territory is that we haven't got huge populations, unlike say the UK where there's 66 million people waiting for the vaccine. So I anticipate that we'll put teams of people in sites such as Albert Riso House to get people from the age of 70 onwards. They're our priority population. We'll start with 80, but we'll go down to 70. It's obviously important because we get a lot of infections among healthcare workers that we also vaccinate healthcare workers as well as the people that look after the elderly. And you know, if you're an older person and you have a carer, or if you have a cleaner, I think this is a time when you would encourage them to come forward to be vaccinated. We will have, I hope, enough stock to be able to cover everyone, including cross-frontier workers, and then we'll gradually go down the ladder of age. We certainly want to capture people above the age of 50, and I also want to capture the at-risk population. So if you've got diabetes, if you've got chronic bronchitis, chronic heart disease, and you're not in any of those age ranges, then we'll try to make provision to contact you. One of the challenges for us is sometimes the records in the GHA, the records of the phone numbers aren't accurate. So I would encourage all your viewers to make sure their records are up to date, because if we can't contact you, if you're not in, you're no longer have the same telephone number, it makes it really difficult for us to tell you that your time is due.
What percentage of the community would need to take the vaccine in order to protect it as a whole from the virus?
I've heard lots of talk about herd immunity, but of course no one talks about herd immunity for measles, for example. So actually what I'm really focused on is getting the people at risk protected. We've got to remember that this vaccine will protect you from infection, but we're not quite clear whether it stops you from infecting others. And that's a debate that people will be, if they go online, watching news, that's a debate that's still going on. Will it stop you infecting others? From my point of view, I want to protect the people that are going to suffer bad consequences from infection. So that does mean largely the elderly and people with significant morbidities, as we call them, sicknesses, illnesses. If I can get them protected, I can foresee a time when we can go through the rest of the population but not have the consequence that we've been always worried about, which is an overwhelmed healthcare system.
Now, will the immunosuppressed be able to take the vaccine as well?
So the advice that I've seen, the Green Book's just been produced in draft, and that says there's no reason why they shouldn't. Remember, an important thing to remember here is this is not a live vaccine. It's not even a dead vaccine. You know, the virus isn't there. It's just a single protein of the virus that is produced by yourself in your own cells. You produce it. So there's nothing there that is live that can affect your own immunity.
Okay. Now, the Chief Minister has said, although this is fantastic news, we mustn't let our guard down. The virus is still out there. How much longer do you think we'll need to live our lives in a way that includes mask wearing, social distancing, essentially before we're back to normal?
The more people that take up the vaccine are immune, I think there's going to be a real dialogue, and it's already happened. I think one or two airlines have already mentioned that they'll be looking for an immunity certificate. It might be something that could go on your phone. So I do think that we'll actually gradually recognise that if we have the vaccine, we'll have more freedoms. Particularly, for example, if Spain starts insisting on having some kind of certificate that says you're immune. So I think we will gradually get to a situation where more and more people will be immune, and we will begin to have what we've always wanted, was an individual assessment of your own risk. The key reason why we did social distancing was because we didn't want our healthcare system to be overwhelmed because lots of people falling sick at the same time. And the other key thing was that we didn't want unnecessary deaths to take place because of that, that you didn't get your appropriate treatment. Much better now, we've got much better understanding of what kills you. We can't always prevent it. If you have this particular virus, it can be particularly nasty if it gets into your lungs, but we've got more treatments than we've had before.
Now, you've said you're not aiming for a herd immunity approach, that you're going to try and tackle those who are most vulnerable, but that you also need a certain amount before things like mask wearing and social distancing will disappear. So how do you intend to balance these two things?
Well, I say my priority is to get the people that might suffer really bad consequences protected first, and then we'll roll it out amongst the rest of the community. It's always a choice, and with that choice will come some freedoms, I suspect. That's the way it'll work, that you'll be able to get on a plane and fly to whichever destination you want, or if you have to cross into Spain, they want these certificates, it might be slightly different. So it is a bit about winning hearts and minds of individuals. We have flu vaccination. Not everyone takes it up. We have problems with vaccine uptake with children as well. And I think some of the things is that we've forgotten what the real disease looks like. I worked in North London, and there we had certain communities that believed it was okay to have measles parties, but I've also seen a 14-year-old child whose brain had literally dissolved from measles they'd had 10 years previously. So natural diseases are not benign. And we know with COVID, you only need to read and look up the internet. There's something called long haul COVID, and there are literally millions of people who are suffering in a way that we couldn't imagine before. We really don't know what the long-term effects of COVID are.
Are you confident enough that people will take this vaccine here on the Rock?
Well, there was a quick survey done, wasn't there, in a different media, and I think there were 299 people that signed up for it. Half the population said they were ready to take it. I think that's a fantastic result in the sense that we haven't promoted it at all. People themselves want to get out of this, what I call COVID fatigue, and everybody else calls it. So I'm hopeful that we can get up to 70% of the population without a great deal of persuasion. I do want us to be careful about misinformation here. The difficulty around misinformation is, people say that you can prove anything. So when we're talking about what consequences there are for the vaccine. I was just speaking to the World Health Organization earlier today, and the point was made that when millions of people are getting the vaccine, there will be people who die. Not from the vaccine, but just coincidentally, because people do die. Sadly, we lost 3 people over the age of 90 in ERS recently. They were already suffering from quite significant terminal illness, and most people expect to die when they get to 90. So it's not the vaccine that will cause the problems. I think it'll be coincidence, and I want to deal with that head on, really, that when all of us are having the vaccines, some of us are falling ill from other things.
Now, the poll that you mentioned, which was published in the Chronicle, it said 46% of respondents said that they would take the vaccine. That's 54% that wouldn't, even though it's a small margin. So if you're aiming for 70%, what kind of things will you be doing to promote this?
Well, we want to work with the community. We want to work with opinion formers. We'll work with social media. We'll get leaders. I'll be first in the line to get vaccinated. I realise that maybe people expect that of me, but I will, and we'll get our leaders to be vaccinated to demonstrate both its efficacy and that it's a good thing to have. At the end of the day, it is everyone's own particular choice. I suspect that most people will go along, because you said 46%, but actually I think only 36% said a frank no. So that's 2/3, 1/3. And at the end of the day, the other thing to keep in mind is this virus we now know has an animal reservoir, and we also know we won't be able to vaccinate in certain parts of the world because it's not going to get there. So this virus will stick around for a long time, and it may even mutate. So it's possible, we don't know how long the immunity will last, but it's possible that we may need it as an annual injection. And again, we don't coerce people to take a flu vaccine, but it's almost common sense that you don't want to suffer from a bout of flu. It's not nice.
The vaccine's been rolled out in record time. What can you tell us about the measures in place to ensure it's properly tested and is safe for use?
So there are checks and balances that have been well established for all vaccines, all medication. The medication regulator in the UK has a process, and we are assured, and I've seen from the processes, there's been no shortcut taken. The thing is that Pfizer and BioNTech have thrown money at this. $2 billion, I think, was the estimate. What does $2 billion buy you? It buys you people, it buys you resources, it enables you to get stuff that otherwise you would have to wait. A traditional vaccine, you have a few doctors and a few researchers sitting around saying, how are we going to raise the money? How are we going to get ethical approval? How are we going to raise the volunteers to test it out? What process it? And it's a long drawn out process because the money isn't there. But because there was money here, and because we had some really clever people utilising that, we've been able to get a vaccine in record time, but no shortcuts were taken.
Are you concerned with the level of disinformation there is out there at the moment about a COVID vaccine and even vaccines more widely?
Yes, so there's a lot being said about the infodemic as much as that. I mean, there are various ways to look at this. One of the reasons we have a high quality of life, one of the reasons the West is regarded as being supreme in that quality of life is because the West bought into this model of science that says scientific endeavour, engineering are good things and that we can do good out of them. If we go back and start to undermine the very thing that made us wealthy and preeminent, then we will lose that place, and other nations, other civilizations will take over, in the Far East, for example. So yes, we can undermine the very things that made us great, but the cost of that is that we will no longer be as great. So of course I'm concerned about misinformation. Sometimes the misinformation are coming from people who are genuinely concerned. They love their children, they love their families, they don't want harm to come to them. But at the end of the day, why in heaven's name would someone dream up something that was harmful and then send it out? Have they not got families? Have they not got children of their own? Why would they want to do that? And remember, these are developed by our own people. In the same reason that you get into a bus, knowing that the driver shares the same destiny as yourself, you trust that the driver isn't going to crash the bus. This is much the same issue, that the scientists and the developers share that same endeavour, which is, of course, they want to make profits, but at the end of this day, this virus and these vaccines aren't going to generate huge amounts. In fact, I think one of the Oxford vaccines has been given away at cost price, from what I understand. So there are people, there are good people. Why do we always try to undermine and try to rubbish the efforts of people who want to do good and want to help their common man? So of course I'm worried about the infodemic. We'll do the best we can to tackle it. I'm always open for debate with people, but what has also happened is people have turned it into a religion. And again, no matter how long and how hard I might want to debate with someone of a different faith, I know I won't be able to persuade them because it's not evidence, it's a matter of faith. So we've got to distinguish between the people that have a faith that something is wrong with the people that are genuinely asking questions that want those questions answered.